Hello everyone, this is Chaz in Omaha, here with another build guide for last Epoch. This time we have the Burning Dagger Heartseeker Marksman. I really enjoyed leveling and grinding the endgame with this character, probably more so than a majority if not all of the characters I've played in the past. This is also the first character I managed to kill Aberroth with, and I feel it may have spoiled me as it felt quite easy and fast. First off, let's just go over the key points of the gameplay. You mostly do pretty standard marksman rogue stuff. You zip around with shift to get out of trouble and maintain Shuriken shield. Then you right click when you're able to spam Heartseeker on your enemies. Meanwhile, dragon fire flows out of your face like a lava river, and you're surrounded by dozens of burning daggers which then fly all over the place. There are a few twists, however. First, it's possible to yourself with the Heartseeker Burning Daggers interaction, even with only 1 out of 3 into the Dagger proc node. However, if you're playing the version of the build that I recommend, this only really happens when you delete trash so fast that it continues proccing the daggers, which drains your mana, without recouping any from Heartseeker hitting the enemies because they're already dead. This isn't really a concern on difficult encounters though, so it's more of an annoyance than an actual problem. Second, if you've ever played a multi-shot build before, you'll be familiar with this one. You need to be a certain distance from your enemies while you're attacking. In this case, it's so the continuous stream of lava coming out of your face can reach them. Third, due to Dragon's Breath proc being a fairly large amount of your damage, you want to be facing your enemies whenever possible. This tends to create positioning that feels a bit awkward and dangerous at first, but I got used to it after a while and I'm sure you will too. You don't need a full bar of stuff, so you can use an unspec decoy to bait fight mechanics away from you if you want to. Also, if you do end up from either going full dagger spam version or the aforementioned enemies dying instantly issue, you can swap to Cinderstrike for a few shots because it's mana free. What are the strengths of this build? Well, first, as usual with rogue builds, you move quite quickly through echoes. Due to the speed at which you heal, you aren't leeching, it's actually healing, and thus it's instant, you can often face tank and ignore enemy abilities that rogues normally shouldn't be anywhere near. Armor shred and resistance shred applies really fast, even with minimal amounts like the 25% minimum empowered blessing, due to the extremely high number of hits you dish out. Boss damage is also very high, as long as you're able to plant and face them properly. There are no items that are required to play this build. The gear ceiling is also very high, and if you have the Uber endgame version of this build, you should be able to beat Uber Aberroth with it. Well, what are some of the weaknesses of this build? While the gear ceiling is very high, gearing is also a bit touchy while you progress through the endgame for a few reasons. First of all, we have Mourningfrost. It's highly recommended as it scales insanely well for Dragon's Breath. This means a few things. Your physical and cold res are always something to be aware of as you get more and more decks, especially Fizz res as it's far more important. This also means that when you get a shiny new dex item, it might change your resist situation significantly. Next, getting crit cap can be a bit complicated. The Dragonsong bow has between 4 and 7 flat crit roll, which means you'll probably be hunting and or using the new Weaver Echoes to craft quite a bit so that you can get a 6 or 7% version with a high percent of Dragon's Breath proc. The character sheet doesn't actually understand the flat crit from the Dragonsong bow as it's for fire skills only, so you kinda gotta keep track yourself. Also, the bow prefix for flat crit, 5% at tier 5 and up to 10% at tier 7, is a rare shard, which means that finding this bow to put into your LP Dragonsong can be a little painful. Finally, due to the large number of uniques you eventually want, keeping up with gear swapping and hunting gets a bit complicated. You're probably going to want to use a build planner and maybe have a couple versions. That way you're kind of on track with what you're trying to get currently and what you might want to get in the future. Another weakness is it is quite necessary to face your enemy and be within a certain distance to do really good damage. This definitely takes some getting used to. Okay, so now we can go ahead and review the skills and maybe talk about the order you might put your points into as you level up. First off, we have Cinderstrike. You get this skill very early in the game. You'll use it as your primary attack until you get Heartseeker, and potentially you'll use it even later if you run into the issue or if you just decide to go a slightly different version. First off, you want to go up through here and get the Burning Daggers node right here. You want to go ahead and max that out. Then you want to put one into Fire Breathing so that your Cinderstrike throws a cone of Burning Daggers. This is pretty fun when you first get it. After that, you should go down and get the Combustible. Right around the time where you max out the Combustible, you might be at the point where you can get Heartseeker and you might just stop using this entirely. If that's not the case, then go ahead and put just extra points into Oil Coating, or you can go over to the Coated Dart. Okay, the next skill you're going to go ahead and spec into is Shift. For Shift, I would always recommend just going into Momentum first because it just makes the early game, which is already kind of easy, just faster. You can even put 3 out of 3 into this at the beginning if you want, just because it makes you even faster for longer. Next, you want to go ahead and get Shadow Slip. Having the invulnerability with Shift just kind of negates a lot of boss abilities, and it's really convenient. After that, you want to go to the full Shuriken throw thing. Finally, you get the Cleanse, and then your final point can go into Elusive. Okay, the next skill that you're going to spec into is Shurikens. Now, Shurikens is kind of a weird skill because there's a lot of points in here that don't really matter. And without a couple points in here, it doesn't even work. So, first you want to go into here and go all the way through to 1 point in Bladed Armor. Because without 1 point in Bladed Armor, this doesn't do anything. Next, you want to go ahead and max this out. The reason you want to max this out is because once one of these hits an enemy, without this, they'll just disappear and you lose your armor buff. So you get 1 in the armor buff first, so it does something. Then you get the pierce, so it doesn't go away. After you get the full pierce, I would alternate between these 2 nodes until they're maxed. After that, these last 5 points don't really mean anything, but you can get this acrobatics thing if you want to push Shuriken to do a backflip. Personally, I never use it, especially with Evade in the game now, so you can put the last 5 points wherever you want. It just really doesn't make any difference. Right around level 39, I think it is, you'll finally be able to get Heartseeker. I would recommend you just go ahead and wait until level 35. I mean, you should wait to spec in for your 35 until you can use Heartseeker, unless you just want to use Smoke Bomb spec for 4 levels and unspec it. You know, that's up to you. So the first thing I would do with Heartseeker is I would go down and get 1 out of 3 of the Blades of the Pyre. That way you're throwing Burning Daggers with Heartseeker also. After that, I would go up to Nimble Threads. Now at this point, you have a decision to make. You might start experiencing periods of being out of mana, and you're just gonna have to feel this one out because I don't quite remember exactly at which point I did these 2 things, but if you really don't like the being problem, you're gonna want to go into 2 out of 4 Heart Drain first. Otherwise, you're gonna want to go into Dragon Fang first. You can also just kind of do a little bit of each. You know, you can kind of feel it out. So that's just a decision you have to make. Afterwards, if you go here first, you want to go here, and then if you go here first, then you want to go here next. Then you have another decision to make. You can either go into a lot more offense or a lot more defense, or a little bit of both. If you do go into Hidden Skewer first, which is the defense option, only go 2 out of 3 in this, or you'll run out of points until you have until you have a +4 Heartseeker chest piece. Then you just do the opposite of whichever one you didn't do. For the last skill, we have Smoke Bomb. The order in which you spec these points for Smoke Bomb are pretty irrelevant in my experience, because like once you've got Heartseeker going with Cinderstrike and you're throwing Burning Daggers all over the place, by the time Smoke Bomb feels relevant for like defense that you use it for, you're already at level like 80 and you have all your points. So you can kind of put your points in any order you want. You could also go into Smoke Blades or Umbral Assault early on if you just want like some more offense at a Smoke Bomb. Other than that, I just wouldn't sleep on the value of Rapid Concealment plus Shrouded in Darkness, because Dusk Shroud is really, really good defense. And these area and duration nodes are basically just to make it so that the defense from Dusk Shroud is more usable. Okay, now we can go over gearing of this build. The gearing on this build, there's a lot to talk about, so strap yourself in. First, I wanted to mention the helm, as almost assuredly people will ask on the comments of the video, what about the Heartseeker helm? That's a fair question. The Ravager's Dart, I started this character originally planning to use this helm. I was thinking I could spam Cinderstrike to get oil coating buffs, while the helm auto through Heartseekers, and it would be a pretty cool interaction. This does work. However, it is really suboptimal compared to Heartseeker spam. What I didn't know, and you might not know, is that Heartseeker is not a debuff on an enemy. It's a little projectile on the ground that flits back and forth. This means that you can hit the same enemy many, many times by spamming it on top of them. I highly recommend you do not use this helm unless you just want to experiment with it. Your DPS will be nowhere near what it could be. Okay, now that that's out of the way, we'll go back to the uniques that I do recommend for the build. None of these uniques are strictly required for this build to function. That being said, the first two are a very high priority. First off, we have the Dragonsong. This bow isn't strictly mandatory, but if you don't have one, your character is going to be significantly weaker. The flat crit it provides for both Heartseeker and Burning Daggers is very important. Also, the Dragon's Breath proc gets spammed, while the build is also scaling incredibly well with Mourningfrost. Dragon's Breath doesn't appear to have any sort of in-kernel cooldown, so getting as close to the max roll should be quite noticeable. Next we have the Mourningfrost boots. These boots, I think a lot of people might just argue that they are mandatory, and I would definitely equip a pair ASAP. My original version wasn't going to use these, but when I put them on after doing a bit of research, holy crap, you definitely want to use these things. Getting a 1 LP of these with tier 6-7 movement speed inside of them should be your number 2 priority after getting a Dragonsong. If you're familiar with the LE Endgame and how to use the Weaver Tree, I would highly recommend targeting a max movement speed version, which would be 10 implicit, 20 explicit. Okay, so now we're getting into the less important but still quite good uniques of the build. First we have Peak of the Mountain. This item isn't really good if you don't have a Dragonsong, so I wouldn't wear this until you at least have a Dragonsong, because the crit that it provides just kind of doesn't really do a lot without having the Dragonsong's flat crit also. The drawback on this helm of not being able to leech from crits is nearly irrelevant for this build, as the 2 passives that heal you on hit and crit are insanely effective with how frequently you hit. If you plan to make a red ring uber endgame version of this build, I would do your best to get at least 4 to all stats on this helm, if not +5. Okay, now we have the neck, the Pearls of the Swine. This neck is really good even at a base level, especially if you're already wearing Mourningfrost. I put this on as soon as I was able, and I had a 0 LP version. The all res stat and the Fizz res implicit is really helpful with the Mourningfrost resist problem. Once again, if you're planning on going for the uber endgame version, focus on getting at least 11 vitality and get +4 to all stats on this item. Finally, for the somewhat early game uniques, we have Ucenui's Fear, or however you say that word. This item is only relevant if you're wearing a Mourningfrost. It's very easy to get 2 LP with this item, and it also helps to offset the Cold Res issue from the Mourningfrost boots. The % increase from spamming orbs on rare/bosses is probably equivalent to roughly 25 to 33% more multiplier if you have decent decks. Now we can talk about the uber endgame items. My build has not even gotten to this point. These are mostly speculative, however, I did get information from another person that has done a build very similar to this, and they were using this, and apparently they've killed Uber Aberroth while using this setup. So first we have the red ring of Atlaria. I think this ring is probably one of the most common, if not the most common, endgame items for making your character insanely tanky. You get 10% DR per ring. All the stats for Mourningfrost is insanely good, and you get armor percent from strength, you get health, you get the dodge percent, which interacts really well with your Dusk Shrouds that you're going to be spamming from Heartseeker spam. Also, the 20% all res makes Null Portent very, very effective. Next, we have the Brewmaster's Buckle. This item versus a really, really well-crafted Praetorian Exalted is sort of debatable. However, this belt is likely needed to equip only a single red ring and still get the 10% DR from it. It may be possible to forego this belt in favor of an insanely well-rolled Praetorian with a sealed affix of like dodge percent or 715 or health or whatever you're missing. If you have 2 red rings along with excellent stat rolls on your Pig Neck, your Peak of the Mountain, and tier 7 stats elsewhere. Next we have the Null Portent chest. This Null Portent chest comes from the normal Aberroth. If you're playing this build and you have the non-Uber version of this build, he should be quite easy. He was for me. Null Portent is basically only worth wearing if you've got the red ring thing going, I think, or you just have insane resist somehow because you have lots of sealed affixes or something. Especially because the Null Portent is probably going to be eating your tier 6 or tier 7 Heartseeker chest when you put it on. So you want to make sure that it's doing its job, right? Last, we have the Ravenous Void gloves. These items are just a 15% DR, which is insane. And then if you pair these gloves with the Null Portent because of the Void percentage reduction, it's pretty crazy. The downside of the Ravenous Void proccing a no health leech effect is totally nullified on this build because we're already unable to leech and we don't even care. So that's pretty cool. So that's it for the gearing of this character. Next up, we can go ahead and talk about the passives. As far as rogue passives go, I feel like the order is less relevant than most classes just because all of the rogue passives are really powerful. I will just point out a few key points that you might want to make note of. First off, while you're leveling, as soon as you get to the 20 mark, even if you want to put more points in, say, like the glancing or the attack speed node, for example, you want to go immediately to Marksman because you want to get to Heartseeker as soon as you possibly can. I think even if you do it as fast as you possibly can, you don't get Heartseeker to like level 39, which is kind of annoying. The Draining Arrows node and the Perfect Aim node are the only healing that you have in the build when you have Peak of the Mountain equipped. That sounds kind of scary, but when you play the build and you see how many times you hit, you heal yourself insanely fast. I just want to point out that these 2 nodes are your only healing, and they're insanely important to have maxed out whenever you can. Another thing I would point out while leveling, these concentration nodes have a very low value. They don't really have good uptime or effect until you're in late game situation where you're fighting difficult bosses where you can get good uptime on it. So what I would recommend is while you're leveling, forego those 3 nodes entirely and instead fill in these other nodes and Missile Mastery temporarily to progress your passive bar over to this side. You'll get a lot more value in Missile Mastery early on, especially before you have Death from Afar for Armor Shred. The last thing I would say about the passives is don't sleep on Master Archer. The 40% chance for Heartseeker recurve is insanely powerful. That's all I have to say about passives for this build. I'm going to go ahead and show you a clip now of the first kill I had for Aberroth from start to end, so that you can see exactly how this build plays and how good it can be. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next time. We have 14 of them. So...
The altar of
I would be pretty surprised if I won. So we fight 2 Harbingers first, right?
Finally returned to me.
That just took me by surprise last time, but it was kind of a whatever.
Prove yourselves worthy.
But I shouldn't get complacent, because they definitely can kill me. Yeah, that's like not really a big deal for this character, right?
My dear sister for a moment.
So now he does the whole room smash thing right at the beginning, and I wasn't really quite sure how you bait it in an easy spot, but I'm gonna stand here because I don't really know.
Oropis would have welcomed you.
So he does it right away though, right after that. So we stand here. And then right when it goes away, we run away. There's that. Okay, so that one pulls like shit to it, right? Oh, there's the triple slam. Alright. Wait, what's he doing? He's phasing? So he rooted me because of the waves, I remember that. There's the ball that creates puddle. Ball. What's this? I don't know what's happening. He's phasing again. That! Okay, that's the thing I forgot, but I dodged it kind of by accident. Oh, that's the pizza. And then he does that right after. Okay. Okay, we gotta get in this again. We won! We did it!